Hey, this is George. Have you ever heard of Anchor.fm? It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. Number one, it's free. Number two, there are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so you can hear it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Check out Anchor.fm on the iOS and Android systems.
Need psychotherapy online or in person? Check out tinyurl.com/THT psychotherapy. The George Brassey Podcast is made possible with funding provided from Brassey Global Strategies, LLC, a leading political consulting, public policy, government affairs, and research firm. Are you interested in running for elected office? Need advice? Call or email George, 708-769-5015. Brassey Global Strategies 1@gmail.com.
Snowstorm forces Chicago Heights to close City Hall. Snowstorm forces Chicago Heights to close City Hall, Chicago Heights, Illinois. Snow was on everybody's mind at Wednesday night's Chicago Heights City Council meeting. The Chicago area was hit by a major snowstorm, and Chicago Heights had about 10 inches of snow dumped on it Tuesday and Wednesday. City Hall was closed Wednesday afternoon because of the winter storm, and garbage pickup on Wednesday and Thursday was also postponed. And students at Chicago Heights School District 163 went to remote learning Wednesday because of the storm. The mayor's chief of staff, Karen Zaranti, thanked city workers for their efforts. She told the council that city workers had been working round the clock to keep city streets open and safe, and would continue to do so throughout the duration of the storm. Fifth Ward Alderman George Brassey also lauded city workers, saying, "The snowstorm we have experienced in recent days has been terrible, but the City of Chicago Heights Public Works Department has done an excellent job in maintaining the roads during the snowstorm. Each and every resident's request that was submitted to my office was addressed in a quick and efficient fashion." Christopher Bykoskas, 4th Ward Alderman, added that Public Works is working diligently, doing a great job cleaning up the streets. In other business, Zaranti said that the city would be hosting its second Illinois Department of Public Health clinic offering vaccinations and booster shots 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Saturday, February 12 at City Hall. The council also approved an ordinance renewing the city's employee health insurance policy and premium. The city expects to see premiums remain roughly the same. The city's benefits and insurance consultant told the council that he was able to negotiate lower rates with its insurer, Blue Cross/Blue Shield PPO, despite higher prescription drug usage by the 231 employees covered under the policy. Snowstorm forces Chicago Heights to close City Hall.
Before we get to the interview, I just want to tell you about our newest sponsor, Union Signs and Printing. Union Signs and Printing is a union sign shop located near Chicago, Illinois, that specializes in the production of corrugated plastic lawn signs used in applications ranging from political and election usages to unions, schools, and businesses. They also produce a vast array of other products, including American-made, union-printed t-shirts, banners, bio cards, literature, door hangers, business cards, and trifold. Get a hold of Union Signs and Printing at 815-740-1688 or find them on the internet at unionsignsandprinting.com. And don't forget to tell them you heard about their services on the George Brassey Podcast. Matt Dubiel to the podcast. Matt is the founder of Podstars and the president of Sportsbook Radio, Chicago AM 1530 WCKG, as well as the owner of Q101, Chicago's Alternative. Matt, welcome to my podcast.
Hey, George. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, great to have you. Matt, before we get into Q101, which is what I initially contacted you to talk about, tell the audience a little bit about your journey in Chicago radio.
I started as an intern for the great Steve Dahl. And so this was about 1994, 1995. I was about 17 years old. And I sent letters out to pretty much any place and every place, but I focused predominantly on the shows and the talent that were in the building at the Hancock at 875 North Michigan, because that's where these radio stars were that got me excited about radio. And I'm talking about Steve Dahl and Jonathan Brandmeier and Kevin Matthews, and a new guy had just come to town named Man Cow that people my age at the time were really a flutter about, and kind of took the the rock and radio world by storm. And so I sent letters out to all those shows, and I started out as an intern for Steve Dahl, and it was right after Steve Dahl and Gary Meyer had broken up, which was a pretty big deal. I mean, in Chicago radio, for people that knew and lived here, that was like Abbott and Costello breaking up, or Lucy and Desi breaking up. And so Steve Dahl went to go work at AM 1000. At the time, the call letters were WMVP, and it was Chicago's first, maybe second sports station. And sports was still fairly new as far as broadcasting and radio goes. And Steve Dahl was doing mornings with Bruce Wolf, and I was an intern. And so I would go in there and get the carts ready for Steve Dahl, and get the cooler with the Diet Cokes ready. And then I would keep show notes and keep a show log of the things that were being talked about during the Steve Dahl show. And that was the beginning of my radio odyssey. And it was a lot of fun. And Steve it was a different, slower paced show. It was an AM, morning show. And it was a different time, because here he is, not only having had broken up with Gary Meyer and kind of sending ripples through the radio world, but Gary got to stay on the FM by himself. Steve went over to the AM, and it kind of felt like we were on an island, and all the exciting, fun stuff was happening at the Loop and Rock 103.5. And so after a few months of being there, I moved over and I started interning with Wendy and Bill, which was the night show on the Loop. And that was Wendy Snyder and Bill Leff. And I just had a blast with them. And it was a much better sort of fit for, a young person that was hungry and wanted to get more involved and wanted to do more. And they were willing to let you do it. And before long, they moved and left the Loop and took the morning show job at Q101. I think that was like 1996, 97-ish. And so they moved their show to mornings on Q101, and they brought everybody that was with them over. And so my first paycheck was actually from Q101. Then it was owned by MS Communications, and that was my first paycheck in radio.
So Matt, was your doing all that free labor as an intern, was your end goal to be an on-air personality or to be in the business end of radio at that point? I always thought that I would end up in the business end of things, but I thought it would be when I was older and had gone through, sort of the different levels and stops along the way. So at that age, my plan and my hope was I didn't want to be somebody else, but I wanted to do what Johnny B did. And there was only one other. So I mentioned Rock 103.5, and the afternoon guy at Rock 103.5 was a guy named Lou Brutus. And he's still on the air today. In fact, he does a syndicated show called Hard Drive. But when Lou did afternoons at Rock 103.5, it was a real hybrid of almost like he wrote material. It definitely wasn't off the cuff. I mean, he made it feel like it was off the cuff. But this guy was delivering a really nice, balanced version of a music entertainment show that wasn't talk heavy. And so I thought, okay,
That was the way to go. I thought there would be more of that in the future. And I thought, I want to be like that. But one day I want to get to, back to doing a morning show like Brandmeier does. And frankly, I didn't think I could do it. Like, I just thought, man, this guy just does stuff that, you got to be almost like Michael Jordan. You have to be born with some of it. You have to be working at it for a long time. And I don't know if I'll ever get to that level. But it was definitely to be on the air at that level. That changed pretty rapidly over the course of the next few years. But it was definitely all about being on the air for me at that age.
And currently, you are an owner of a radio station. Tell the audience a little bit about the radio station you own that's not Q101.
Sure. So in 2013, we bought AM 1530, which back, flashing back to when I was 17, 18, and I was interning for Steve Dahl, I had heard about this AM 1530 because it wasn't far from where I grew up in Downers Grove. AM 1530 was WJJG in Elmhurst. And it was owned by this older guy, an old Italian guy named Joe Gentile, who had a reputation for being sort of a hard ass sometimes and maybe curmudgeon-y at other times, but also having a tremendous heart of gold and being philanthropic and generous. So you didn't know kind of what to believe, but I remember thinking and hearing about this station because when I was interning for Dahl, the word on, I'd heard that you could buy time and you could essentially rent an hour or a half hour or whatever on this AM 1530 and you could be on the air. And I always thought, geez, that's probably what I got to do because I didn't really want to work or, move to Paducah, Kentucky. It seemed like a great way to do it from home and still have your cake and eat it too. But I never quite did it because the thought of selling commercials and spending hours and hours and hours to sell commercials to get the money to pay for your airtime sounded like just a distraction to me, and I never did it. So fast forward to like 2013, I'm working for an infomercial guy at the time. And he had hired me to launch a radio network for himself. And we did it from the ground up. We built him studios. We, designed the show. We produced it. We did the whole thing. And we were negotiating with various radio stations to buy time to put this show on the radio in Chicago. And we got close to a couple of deals. In fact, we got really close to a deal with The Loop and Q101 at the time. And but they fell through and they were for big money. This guy was willing to pay big money to be on the radio. And since those deals fell through, I had to get this guy on the radio in our home market. And so I bought time for him on AM 1530 at the time it was WJJG. And this was about 2008, 2009. And over the years, I got to know and spend time with the owners, Joe Gentile and Carol Gentile. And I started helping them fix the radio station up because it was, it had just been neglected a little bit. They were focusing on some other things and it needed some updating and it needed some polishing and some shoring up. And so I volunteered to do it. And I really started to have a good time with it. And when it came time to sell the station in around 2012, 2013 or so, Carol came to me and said, I'm thinking about selling the station. Joe had fallen ill and then had passed away, and he lived a full life. He was in his 80s. And she said, I'm thinking about selling it. And she said, would you be interested? And I had just gone through this experience with having bought Q101, the name, the brand, the intellectual property, because I thought in 2011 that the future would be all digital and signals and FCC licenses and all those sort of things were going to be relics. And I had learned the hard way from my Q101 experience from 2011 to 2013 that radio was still very relevant. And I thought this was a great opportunity. And I thought I could get a decent price and I could build my dream of owning and operating in my hometown. And so we bought an AM radio station in 2013.
Wow. What a story. Matt, let's get into the story of Q101 prior to your purchasing it. You said MS Communications owned it. Were they a Chicago-based communications company, or were they a national carrier?
MS was some not a big national player, but they were definitely not from Chicago. They were based in Indianapolis, and for years, Q101, Chicago's alternative, was their only station in Chicago. Somewhere in the 2000s, they purchased the Loop, and then and the company itself, MS Communications, which was based in Indianapolis, was kind of fraught with some controversy for a while, where their CEO Jeff Smulyan was trying to take the company public, and then there was a period where he was trying to not to not take it public, or to take it private again. And so there was things going on, and I think what happened in Chicago is, when they got the Loop, they bit off more than they could chew. When Q101 was a standalone and MS owned it, it did really well, and it billed well. It had its it's not easy to be a standalone in a major market, and they did it very well. But leading up to the 2000s, it was just Q101 that they owned in Chicago. Then they got the Loop. Then things seemed to kind of get off kilter a little bit. And then by the time 2008, 2009 rolled around, nobody knew this, but they were actively trying to sell one or both of the stations. And I discovered that because when I mentioned that I was trying to buy airtime for that infomercial guy, I had meetings with the general managers and the executives at MS in Chicago, and they were offering to sell us prime airtime on the Loop. And you just don't do that on a music station for a talk show. You don't allow somebody just to come in and buy airtime to talk about random things like politics or controversies. So I kind of knew something was up, and lo and behold, they were trying to, as part of their battles to go private and then go public and unload their balance sheet, they were trying to sell the Loop and or Q101 as early as 2008.
And when does one finally go off air? Is it 2011?
Yeah, it was June of 2011. It had been announced that the Loop and Q101 were purchased by Randy Michaels and his startup that was funded by, well, a lot of people don't know this. The money that Randy Michaels got to buy the Loop and Q101 came from a venture capital firm that was backed by then billionaire Bruce Rauner, but Bruce was about to become the governor of Illinois. And so right before he ran for governor of Illinois, him and his financiers gathered some money together, and this firm gave a bunch of that money, billions, I think, to Randy Michaels, who is a fake name for a guy named Benjamin Hummel. And he's a longtime radio guy. And he was one of the pioneers of what ended up becoming Clear Channel and eventually iHeartRadio. But he's also sort of beset by controversy. But when he bought these stations in Chicago, it was announced immediately almost that Q101 was going to become an FM news station. And that I just thought it was just, there was no discussion or conversation about what was happening with the brand and the legacy and the audience and the 20, some years of Jamboree and Twisted and Block Party and all these events and all of this legacy that had occurred in Chicago. And I called the corporate office of MS immediately and asked if what they had planned for the intellectual property and the digital assets and the all the IP for Q101. And they didn't really know what I was talking about. And they were confused. And I said, no, they said, well, we're selling that to Merlin Media, this company that Randy Michaels started with Bruce Rauner's money. And I said, well, but what are you going to do with all the stuff? And they said, oh, let us get back to you. Then I called them again and they said, well, call us when it gets closer to the deal because we don't really know what he's taking and what he isn't. So then I called again. I'm pretty tenacious. I called again and I said, I had to lay it out for them again. And I said, I want the website. I want the Facebook page. I want to own the story. I want to own everything about it. I want any recordings. I want whatever it is that's Q101 that you guys are essentially putting in the dumpster. And they said, well, how much do you want to pay? And I thought they were going to ask for millions, and that's where the whole story would end. And I said, well, how much do you want for it? Because you're already getting, millions for the stations. And clearly you guys didn't think this stuff was worth anything. And they said, how about 50 grand? And at the time I had a partner, and we were in my office, and I had to cover up the phone because I was laughing and I giggling because I was so tickled that it wasn't millions of dollars. And I countered and I said, I could do 40. And they okay. And so for $40,000, we bought Q101 and the brand and the story in 2011.
Wow, that backstory, I've never heard you describe former Governor Rauner's role in it, let alone how low of a price you got for such a great brand. That's amazing.
Yeah, I thought so at the time. What was really frustrating to me was that when you watched it unfold, and I think you live in Illinois, right?
Yeah, sure. Chicago.
Yeah. So it was curious to me what they were really trying to accomplish. I knew in my heart and with my experience that the way they were doing this news thing, I mean, it was just stupid to throw out that brand and that legacy it wasn't a failing radio station when he bought it. He bought it because Emmis was in trouble. So it was a struggling company, but the stations were robust and were doing fine, and they could have been managed better, but they weren't worth killing. And the reason why they killed it was because Rauner and his funding GTCR and Benjamin Hamel all had an agenda, and their agenda was to get FM news on the radio. And I can't prove this, and it's just a theory, and it's only my opinion, but it seemed to me that it was awfully curious, the timing, because Rauner spent millions, if not maybe hundreds of millions, on his gubernatorial run, and you spend it mostly on TV and radio. And so I thought maybe this is a way for them to spend money with themselves for the gubernatorial election in this market, and maybe after that he has plans on wanting to parlay that into something else, like maybe a bigger office. And he thought that if he could control these news stations in Chicago, and they got another one in New York, and if he could pay himself with his own money, that somehow that would be a smart move. And it failed on all fronts, although he obviously did become governor, but the station failed miserably, and it was a complete disaster.
And then that station eventually becomes a new alternative station on the same dial and frequency that Q101, the intellectual property you own, used to air on.
Yeah, I mean, and so a second ago you said, hey, I didn't know the backstory and how you got it for such a steal and all that. It became sort of like a cursed exchange, because the first event of the exchange was the promises that were made of what we would get for the money we were paying were not met. And so we had to settle almost immediately with Emmis because they decided that they didn't have the archives and tapes, and they weren't willing to give us certain things that they had promised us. And we had wired them a down payment of $20,000, which, it's not like we're not Rauner. So that $20,000 was significant for us at the time. And we had to work to come up with the second $20,000, but we got word from Emmis, and they said, well, we don't want to give you all this other stuff, and we can't make good on it. We overpromised, so we'll give you what you already got, and you don't have to give us any more money. So we ended up getting it for 20 grand. But then, before you know it, that Randy Michaels Merlin project fails, and now they realize they need to get money in the door. And before you know it, they put an alternative station on 87.7. They pretend that it's Q101 and they call it Q87.7. They use the story, they use the lore and the folklore and the history of our brand that we paid for to launch that station. And now I'm in court with lawyers and intellectual property disputes and all this sort of stuff. And we're wasting money, now even more money, fighting, essentially Bruce Rauner indirectly and their gazillions of dollars. And we're getting knocked around by like a pinball. And before you know it, they bring it back to life on this 87.7. And since it's doing so well over there and FM news is so bad, they, long and short of it, they end up putting alternative back on 101.1. And rather than doing the professional and ethical and smart thing, which is saying, hey, how can we do a deal with you to put this thing, put Humpty Dumpty back together again? We'll pay you a little bit for your thought and effort and everything else, but we want to put this thing back together again. They just said, screw these guys. We're going to get the call letters. We're going to use the call letters that we used to have, and we're going to make it seem like we're Q101 without saying Q101. And make this guy's life miserable and cash in the checks for, the legacy and the brand and everything else. And then they sold the station to Cumulus because they realized they were very bad operators, and Cumulus bought it. And then Cumulus hired the old GM from Q101 in the Loop, and they hired the old afternoon guy from Q101, and they had all the staff from Q101. And to this day, people are very confused. And unfortunately, the people in that building and the people that are part of that deception point the finger over at us and make it seem like we did something wrong or we somehow are trying to trick people or whatever, when our intentions were always to have fun and do something interesting and keep the brand alive. And these big companies have just manipulated the media buyers and advertisers and listeners to a point where there's enormous confusion. And it's just kind of obviously it's a sore spot because it didn't have to be that way.
Well, Matt, there's some big changes that have occurred at their lineup as of recently. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, yeah. Ultimately, when somebody as big as Greg Brown, and interesting. So the changes you're talking about, I think, are the fact that Greg Brown, who used to work at Q101 before it was alternative, Greg Brown, I think, did middays on Q101, in the 80s. But Greg Brown retired from WLS. Cumulus owns WLS, and rather than hire somebody new and really show that radio is relevant and the future is bright with smart speakers and audio and everything else, they went, all right, we're going to take somebody from another day part, put them in middays on WLS, and then we're going to take the guy from Q101 and put him on WLS, and then we're going to take move the lineup up on Q101, and then put a syndicated guy from LA who's really from Canada on 101 WKQX at night. And those moves are not the moves of a company that believes that the properties are worth investing in. Those moves are the moves of a company that believes that the future is short and they have to cut costs because they're publicly owned and the future is going to be digital. And I wouldn't be surprised if at some point down the road, 101 WKQX and 94.7 and 890 are sold, or one or just one of them is sold to get some more money into the company.
Matt, what role do you think Mancow had in the rise of the station and the fall, if any?
Well, we had Mancow on AM 1530 for a stretch. He was syndicated by Talk Radio Network, and I've spent a little bit of time with him. And he's when he came to Q101, I wasn't there, but I was leaving because Wendy and Bill, the show that I was interning for, was cut short. And they signed with Mancow, and they brought Mancow in. And that was a really crucial and pivotal time for a few different organizations. One of them was Q101, because they felt like they needed to do that in order to make their next moves. And they thought that it was the way to go. They jettisoned Wendy and Bill. And what's interesting is at that point in time, Wendy and Bill were pretty close to neck and neck with Eric and Kathy. So Wendy and Bill were on Q101, and Eric and Kathy were on 101.9. 101.9 always had this sort of single white female stalker vibe with Q101. They would hire old Q101 jocks, like they hired Brooke Hunter after she left Q101, and they put her on nights on 101.9. They always had a thing for Q101, but they would not play the same kind of music. They were playing more of adult pop music at 101.9. So 101.9, the mix was for soccer moms. Q101 was a little bit more 20-something. And when they brought in Mancow, they killed the Wendy and Bill show. And the difference between the Wendy and Bill show and the Eric and Kathy show was Wendy and Bill were authentic and funny and real and relatable, and Eric and Kathy were manufactured and formulaic, and they had bus billboards that were very expensive, and they had the $1 Million Birthday Game. If you took away the bus boards and the $1 Million Birthday Game, Eric and would get trounced by Wendy and Bill. And if you never put Mancow on Q101, Wendy and Bill would have been as big or bigger than Eric and Kathy, and Q101 would be a very different radio station today. Instead, that didn't happen, and Wendy and Bill never quite found their deserved place in the radio landscape ever again. Eric and Kathy, in the absence of Jonathan Brandmeier and various others, grew, and with their marketing, they grew because there was really nothing else out there. So rather than just women listening to Eric and Kathy, you had men and women, because these guys had to either listen to Mancow or nothing. And if you weren't into that, you had no choice. So you went over to Eric and Kathy. So Eric and Kathy swelled up like a fattened cow. And Q101 then had to go into the sort of the dark side with, not because of Mancow, not like he's the dark side per se, but with Mancow came Limp Bizkit and Metallica and a different angle altogether. And it really made Q101 bipolar. And when you think about the identity of Q101 from a lot of people's perspective in the periods where people think of Q101 very differently, and that period was not maybe the best. Now, was it great for Mancow? Yeah. Was it great for Q101 and Emmis for a little while? Yeah. Was it a short-term fix and not a long-term solution? I believe so. And I think the big mistake there was they should have stuck with Wendy and Bill. If they knew they were going to buy the loop, they could have bought the loop and put Mancow on the loop then, and they could have had the best of both worlds. But they tried to, you can't be halfway pregnant. And you put a guy like Cow on a station that is female and male 50-50, you're going to lose a lot of the females, you're going to lose a lot of those males, and you're going to become a very different animal. And look at where the world is now. There's just, hindsight is 20/20, but building a radio station that is angstful and based on subterfuge and innuendo and fake innuendo with acts like Limp Bizkit and harder music and rap rock and all that sort of stuff versus the Wendy and Bill approach and keeping Q101 50-50, I think it's pretty apparent to people that are in the business that the solution would have been better to stay the course with Wendy and Bill, keep the music 50-50, and it would be revered much differently in the landscape today. And some schmo like me wouldn't own the brand and be running it digitally.
Well, man, I have to be honest with you. The era of Q101 that you're describing was like the era where I fell in love with it. The Mancow, the Limp Bizkit, the nu metal soundtrack. I was in like 8th grade when that all started, and I remember Q101 being like the coolest thing. But and
I didn't dislike it, and I don't mean any disrespect or like not that what you liked is bad, but think of this. So you were in 8th grade at that point, and now you're interested in Q101. Now, all of the majority of the audience of Q101 and the money is not in the eighth graders. The money is in the people that are buying cars and getting home loans and spending money. And so really they needed to be targeting and continue to stay focused on that demo that was in the 20s and aging out to the 30s, because right now they'd be dominating them still, and they'd have this legacy relationship with them. And you know what? I like that era also. It just didn't belong on Q101. It probably belonged someplace on a version of Rock 103.5, or maybe a version of The Loop, or maybe on 94.7 The Zone, or some different outlet. But shifting Q101 from trying to tell people that Metallica is alternative because you're a little harder now because you're playing Limp Bizkit is just, it's inauthentic, and it's not as aligned, and it just led to a bunch more problems. So it's not to poo-poo your tastes or mine, because I didn't mind it. But when you start to talk to the other people and you realize they cycled out an audience that had been built up since 1992, then you see where it was, and look at, the proof is in the pudding. It really damaged their perception. And with media buyers, it became tough, because now you're the black t-shirt station that brings guys that are, a little bit younger and have less buying power. And the reality, unfortunately, is radio in general doesn't want to reach white guys anymore at all. They're not really interested in that at all.
So interesting. Matt, and I know you've been more than generous with your time, so I only have 2 more questions. Right now, if somebody wanted to listen to Q101, they would just go online, q101.com, and music is playing there 24/7, right?
Yeah. Q101, it had an app when we bought it. When we took over, it had 25,000 Facebook fans. Today, Q101 has the most Facebook followers and fans of any radio station, and it doesn't have an FM signal. And you know what? Facebook doesn't have an FM signal either, and neither does Spotify, and neither does Twitter and all these other internet sensations, Snapchat, you name it. Those things don't have radio signals either, and neither do we. So you could listen to Q101 on the Odyssey app, which used to be the radio.com app. You can listen to Q101 on the iHeartRadio app. You can get the Q101 app for Android and iOS. It's all at Q101.com. And if it doesn't say Q101.com or Q101, it's not Q101.
Matt, what are 2 books you would recommend to the audience that have been important to you as a person?
So a lot of people talk about the book Think and Grow Rich in the business circles. And I think that if you have that book, you should get a coffee can and a little bit of lighter fluid and a match and light it up and watch it burn. And instead read the real book that it was derived from, which is called The Laws of Success in 16 Lessons. It's a monster book. I mean, this thing is like, so the copy I have is two books, part 1 and part 2, and it's thicker than a phone book. But it's The Laws of Success in 16 Lessons by Napoleon Hill. It's a really great book, and to me, it's the real recipe that people. So the Think and Grow Rich is like a shortened, abridged version. And I think if you make that, if you read that, you're missing a bunch of stuff, and it's going to sort of derail you a little bit. But if you read the real version all the way through, and you implement some of that stuff, anybody, men, women, boys, girls, young, old, it's wildly impactful on your life. The other book that is a favorite of ours in my family since I was a kid is called My Side of the Mountain. I don't remember who wrote it, but it's a fiction book, and everybody in my family, it's kind of like Where the Red Fern Grows, kind of that ilk, which I would maybe say is a close second to that one. But My Side of the Mountain and Laws of Success in 16 Lessons.
Matt, where can the audience find you on the internet?
I'm at mattdubiel.com. And if you're not sure how to spell Matt Dubiel, you could just go to Matt on Air with 2 T's, mattonair.com. And it all goes to the same spot.
Well, Matt, this has been a great podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time out to do it.
Hey, man, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. Take care. Bye.
Thanks.
Help George stay on the Chicago Heights City Council. Go and donate today at tinyurl.com/AldermanGeorge 2023. Need more George? Like his pages on Facebook. Friends of George Brassey PAC, Fifth Ward Business Alliance, Chicago Heights Bicycle and Pedestrian Resource Center, and the George Brassey Podcast.